Nothing really screams California like triple-digit temperatures, wildfires, and power failures. So let's talk about it. The month of July is starting off rather intensely. Even up in the mountains where I am, we're seeing temperatures pushing 100, while in the valley, they're hitting more than 115 Fahrenheit. Like, if you're a non-American, that's pushing 45 Celsius or higher. It is really bad. And to make matters worse, fire season has already begun in the valley. In the news recently, the community of Oroville experienced the Thompson Fire, which broke out around, of all things, the hydroelectric dam at Lake Oroville. While authorities don't yet know the cause of the fire, I have my own suspicions, given the dam is owned and operated by the power company which shall not be named, the same power company which is notorious for having claimed the lives of around 100 people over the past 10 years or so due to criminal negligence, and the same power company that convinced our government that public safety power shutoffs were a preferable alternative to, actually maintaining the lines in a fire-safe way. And that's where we get into the power failure part of all of this. When this fire broke out in the afternoon of July 2nd, the power company in question scrambled to de-energize all transmission lines upwind of the fire, and that included all rural mountain communities to the east. So my community, despite being nowhere near the area of this fire, was subjected to the same shutoff, and therefore productivity took a massive hit. I was miffed because not only was I not able to work on any content during the shutoff, but a couple of important medical appointments also had to be postponed as a result. So yeah, not fun. And it got me to thinking of the whole nature of the grid and whether these shutdowns actually do anything at all to minimize wildfire risk. To be completely honest, I could not find much in the way of concrete evidence as to the cause and effect, and we need to talk about why. Power generation is literally half as old as America itself, with the first transmission lines being constructed in 1889. Over the past 135 years, all that has changed is the size of the lines, and I mean that quite literally. So, if you happen to know nothing about electrical circuits, and I'll admit I know very little about them also, let me give you a rundown. Electricity is composed of electrons, hence the name. Electrons tend to go from areas of higher concentration to areas of lower concentration until a balance is achieved. Basically, positive is attracted to negative until it becomes zero. Metals tend to be very adept at moving electrons in this way, because when metals are ionized, they have extra electrons they want to give away to something that has fewer electrons. So we tend to make our power lines out of metals, such as steel, aluminum, and copper. But there are limitations to how much a metal is able to transport electrons along itself. An aluminum wire, for example, can transfer electricity at a certain rate, but then if you try to pump more electricity through it, the excess will be converted into raw heat energy. Too much, and the metal will just melt into nothingness. Larger scale power lines get around this by bundling or braiding metal wires together, so that electricity is distributed evenly across each wire. So some of these ultra high voltage wire clusters can be packed enough to be as thick around as a human thigh. Sorry, I couldn't think of a better analogy here. The next problem is that energy has to move in multiple directions along these lines, because it's a delicate balance moving energy between multiple buildings in multiple communities, with some of that electricity being sent back to the power station on the circuit to be used elsewhere. So now you've got multiple clusters of wires suspended in the air, varying hundreds of thousands, if not millions, of volts of electricity. And to make things even more complicated, yes, these lines are usually covered with layers of insulating material, but the way an insulator works is it dampens electrical current by refusing to allow electrons through its material. That only works for as long as the insulating material can withstand the charge difference. At such high voltages, even the insulators become overwhelmed, and electrical leakage sends free-floating electrons into the air itself. This causes electrical arcing and sparking. In fact, it can become so bad that if two wire clusters are even just a few inches apart, they are very likely to have arcing through the air itself that would basically destroy both lines in a matter of minutes. So the way that engineers in the US have gotten around this for the last century and some change is to put wider spacers on these line clusters and to spread them out across wider diameter towers, you know, those massive metal ones that look like wireframes of skyscrapers, which I guess works fine until you realize that all of this is incredibly heavy. The cables themselves, which can be miles long between connection points, can weigh several tons. And we literally decided as a society, yes, let's hang them up anywhere from 50 to 100 feet off the ground and pray they don't come crashing down. Because the things that cause them to come crashing down are having them sway in the wind, you know, force equals mass times acceleration, or in winter, if they collect snow and ice, which makes them heavier, and again, causes them to sway in the wind and basically come crashing down. When engineers realized that they could, did they ever stop to question if they should? That's what I'd like to know. And all of this gets into why power shutoffs happen. The reason lines are de-energized is because when conditions get bad, one of two things is going to happen. The first is that the swaying power lines will get too close together, cause electrical arcing, which again is like miniature lightning strikes, and those arcs will come in contact with, say, a nearby tree. The second, and even worse scenario, is that swaying causes the line to just break altogether, come crashing to the ground, and it just dumps hundreds of thousands of volts into anything that might be conductive on the ground, thereby incinerating everything in sight. Which, mind you, has been the cause for some of the deadliest and most destructive wildfires in California history. It is the worst kind of catch-22. It's basically saying that power companies know their transmission lines are going to physically fail, they just don't know when it's going to happen. So they will take energy out of the lines, that way if the lines break on that particular day, they can fix the damages without anything catching on fire, provided the line doesn't have any residual discharge which would cause a fire anyway. But when you also consider the fact that discharging and then recharging the lines is going to put additional wear and tear on them, the whole thing sounds really dumb. It's like, if you're old enough to remember incandescent light bulbs, you know exactly what I'm talking about here. When you first power up a light bulb, you are sending a huge surge of voltage through its filament, and that voltage only drops back down after the filament is fully energized. So if you rapidly discharge and recharge that filament, at some point the filament is literally going to blow up inside the bulb, and it looks kind of horrifying if I'm being honest. Now imagine doing that with something that carries almost 1,000,000 volts of electricity. The state of California has ordered power companies like the one I keep mentioning to find a better solution to this. The obvious solution is to bury the lines underground, but it's expensive, and rather than taking the money out of CEOs and shareholders' paychecks, these companies have tried to pawn off the cost onto both their customers and state taxpayers. These utility companies are literally pure evil incarnate, and everybody knows this. It is getting to a point where if you don't have the ability to generate backup power yourself, you're screwed. And even if you can generate backup power, the fact that other essential businesses like doctors' offices and even your internet provider cannot do this means that you will still suffer. And most importantly of all, it still does next to nothing to prevent the wildfires, which will continue to turn this state into a freaking wasteland. A lot of this is just above my expertise, above my pay grade, what have you, but it is something that I truly wish I knew how to change. And I was thinking about this while laying in the dark that night because the generator my family has only covers half the house. So I was laying there and I was just thinking of, if you could just make a new type of transmission line. One which was segmented in such a way that if it did break, it would do so catastrophically into millions of pieces, and those individual pieces would each have much smaller electrical currents to them, that when they hit the ground, they could theoretically discharge without causing a fire. Hell, what if you could make ones that could even discharge without having a risk of electrocution when handled? It really was just a random thought of mine, but I don't know, maybe it could happen. And if anyone does figure out how to do something like that, I can guarantee you, you will be one of the richest people alive. Anyway, that's all I have this weekend. Thank you so much for watching. Stay cool out there because it's hotter than hell right now. And I'll see y'all in the next video.